Hey, deserving listeners, interviews, cast members, Love is Blind, season 3. Let's do it.
Matt, how do you feel when you see comments being like, oh, Colleen just wanted to fall in love. She said yes to anyone.
So I don't know how much I can really say, but the timeline again, you don't really see that. You're not getting a timeline on Netflix. So when I remember going through dating in the pods,
Okay, so Jalea Slays is interviewing Colleen and asked her, what do you think about people saying that Colleen would have married anybody? She just would have agreed to marry anyone that asked her to marry her. Because on the show we saw, if you remember, that she, at least the way they edited it, and it sounds like maybe it's not accurate, but she was thinking maybe Cole was at the top of the list. He said no. Then it was Brennan. Brennan said no. And then it was Matt, and Matt said yes. And so it sounds like there's a different story, but it's hard to imagine that it wasn't kind of similar to that because, of course, she wouldn't agree with Matt and then have Cole and Brett. So at the very least, I think it's accurate that Cole and Brennan were no's to her before it was with Matt, right?
thought of it as kind of like rush or like recruitment, like sorority. You always had a top couple of houses, and Brennan and Cole were actually on the bottom 2 of my 4. I had another person that I talked to that you don't see at all in the pods.
Interesting. That's interesting. I wonder why that would be. Why would they edit that person out? I mean, there's no reason to disbelieve Colleen, right? So there's a 4th guy that she was prioritizing, and that didn't work out, or it was a no or something. Interesting. So it sounds like there were 2 guys, Matt and another guy, and then Cole and Brennan. Huh, that's interesting. So if that's true, which again, there's no reason to disbelieve that, then I think what Colleen is saying is that she narrowed it down to 4, and then she was trying to suss out of those 4 who would be game with her. She was just, getting a lay of the land. And although Matt was higher on the list, that certainly didn't look like that, right? But, who knows? Unless they edited it because, she leaves after being rejected from Cole, goes into the pods or, into the main area with the other women, and she's crying and she's upset and talking about how he's kind of a jerk face. So, I don't know, this story here. Now, she's married to Matt. So if she flips things around in her head unconsciously or consciously to meet a better narrative, if you will, so that at least Matt's feelings are spared. Maybe she's like, well, they were all kind of even-ish, I guess. Yes, it was hard to tell in the pods. So, really, Cole, I didn't really know if Cole would be the one, but it did hurt when he rejected. I don't know. This is interesting.
So I had a very different storyline is what I remember in the pods. Cole and Brennan were kind of just blimps on my radar. And it was mainly that it was the rejection, because at that time when I was dating, I wasn't dating anybody seriously for a long time. It was more of like flings, just talking to somebody, little like month or 2 relationships that they would just kind of like fizzle away. Okay,
so she's saying that Cole and Brennan were blips on the radar, and then now that doesn't seem to make sense. But who knows? She knows better than we would, right? But I think she's now saying that prior to being in the pods, she would have very surface level dating relationships and hadn't. I'm guessing what she's saying is hadn't really gone deep until the pods, and she went deep with a lot of people, and upon being rejected, although they were lower on the list, it still hurt. I think that's what she said.
It was the rejection, because at that time when I was dating, I wasn't dating anybody seriously for a long time. It was more of like flings, just talking to somebody, little like month or 2 relationships that they would just kind of like fizzle away. I never really had someone say, hey, this is not working out in quite some time. So it was just like, I felt kind of what I said earlier, that I was being hard on myself, and then I was putting myself out there to these guys, and those two were the ones that had said, hey, it's not working out. So it was not necessarily who was saying it to me.
That's really interesting. I mean, I can see that. I think what she's saying is what I was saying earlier, that she narrowed it down to 4, and she was trying to figure out who was a yes potential. And then when she got rejected, although if she were able to differentiate more in the moment, she'd be like, well, Cole and Brennan, that's like number 3 and 4. So it hurts, but it's not the end of the world. Because if one of the other guys had said yes, I would have said yes to them anyway. But since she was new to in-depth relationships and new to caring about such a matter, that the rejection really hurt. Yeah, I could see that. But, I could also see how if we could go back in time in a time machine and ask her before Cole rejects her and really ask her, who's at the top of your list. I wouldn't be surprised if this was a different prior to that. But, imagine you marry Matt and you love him and you want to be with him and you get asked a lot of questions. I'm guessing Matt even asked questions as well, given his relational traumas about infidelity that seemed to play out on the TV show. And imagine you're Colleen, and you're thinking, well, how do I mean, he saw the show. He saw me crying when Cole let me down. Because as far as Matt knew, did Matt know that she was going after Cole and Brennan? But at the very least, watching the show, particularly for Colleen, you would think that there would be a lot of motivation to rewrite the story, kind of. Maybe not lying, but emphasizing certain things. And, we can use this as a jumping off point for our own lives. Well, actually, there's research that shows that couples that are doing well and have longevity and are satisfied with their relationship, they tend to gravitate towards new narratives about their life and about their life prior to meeting each other. And that's evidence that things are going well. It's evidence that their memories and their narratives are starting to wrap around the relationship and adhere to the way the relationship feels. Like for Colleen, now, after a year and a half of being with Matt, for her, presumably, since she's still married, she feels like she's in love, and of course she should be with Matt, and of course she shouldn't have been with Cole or Brennan. Of course she made the right choice, and of course this all worked out. What happened back then? It was kind of a blur. A lot of, this, and then, Matt was at the top of the list. The other guys were, so you can imagine it changing because of the way it feels, because of the way things worked out, not because you're actively trying to change it, but just because of the vibe you have. And then fast forward another 10 years or something, if they're still together, the narrative, if the relationship is going well, the narrative might even become more solidified around the destiny of her and Matt. That's fine. I don't think we should analyze that or scrutinize it or something, but it is something to think about. And how can we use this concept? Well, one is that to think about the meaning of your relationship with your partner. What is the we are meaning-making animals. We desire purpose. We are looking for connections. We're looking for meaning. And when we have meaning and purpose and perhaps destiny, depending on how you see things, that are a part of your relationship, then it feels more strong. It feels stronger, feels more robust, feels more secure. If the two, when people say, she's the one of all the people on the planet, she is the one for me. There's no way to know that, of course, and in all likelihood, that's not even true scientifically. But if that narrative helps to solidify the relationship, then why not, right? And who's to say that's not true? So we can be a little bit intentional about that and think about how we do that. It's why we have ceremonies. It's why we have weddings. It's why we have anniversaries. It's why we have rings, because we're trying to establish meaning. These are symbols of a higher purpose, of a deeper foundation, other than just like I wake up today and I decide to be with this person. There are systems and structures in place that give us, I don't know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying. So we can all think about that. We can think about if Colleen is doing that, we can think about how have we done it maybe, and how are we doing it, and what are we doing. Another thing to think about is that what we find in research is when we ask people to narrativize their relationship. This is generally speaking regarding the research. It's an assessment tool actually with couples that we use, that we ask them different stories about their past. And if the stories don't have a positive connotation, especially if they have a negative connotation, then a negative vibe, then it's an indication that the relationship has not been going well for a while and might be heading towards dissolution or divorce or breaking up. When you ask a couple that comes in my office and I say, okay, why did you fall in love? Why did you meet each other? Why did you get married? Why did you make the decision to become committed to each other? If the couple has positive things to say, like, oh, well, even though they're fighting a lot, right? They're in therapy often because they're fighting a lot. In spite of that, they still have a positive story about their origin. But if they are fighting a lot or even if they're not fighting a lot and they have a negative story about their origin, or they're kind of bewildered, like, I don't know, honestly, I don't know why I got together, then that is associated with breaking up soon down the line within a few years. And the reason for that is because when we enjoy a relationship, we just naturally start to adhere a narrative to the way it feels, and not the other way around, because we often think that way, right? We often think like, well, if our relationship was destined to happen and if our relationship was good, there would be a wonderful origin story, right? But often it's the opposite. It doesn't really matter what the origin story was, what the reality was, but if the relationship goes well, then we retroactively will write a story about why we got together to some extent, you know what I mean? Not like changing facts, but the meaning of those facts, and also inserting your own feelings, right? Like you could look back about a relationship that you started 10 years ago and say, yeah, I mean, certainly I got down on one knee and proposed to them and wanted to marry them. But, I was confused. I was young. I was desperate. People were pressuring me. So you sort of insert different thoughts into your head. Whereas if the relationship is going well, then you're like, well, of course I asked them to marry me because we're destined for each other. And I knew that was the one. So and it's sort of, those stories, those narratives are perhaps independent of what you actually were thinking at the time. Because again, you're adhering the narrative to the way things feel right now. Anyway.
Putting myself out there and these guys say, hey, I'm looking at someone else. It just stung a little bit. With Brennan, it was a complete friend relationship. And I'm just very intoxicated when he said it's not working out. So that's why I cry. And then with Cole, I don't know. I think he could agree with me on this one, that we never just connected in the pods. There was a reason why we weren't speaking on the same page. And I remember he kept telling me in the pod.
Yeah, I don't have any reason, but I will add or reiterate a thought that I had while I was watching the show, which was that she gives some vibe of someone who might not really be connected with what they want and what they deserve and what their needs are and who they are and how they feel about things, right? I don't know, but if she were raised in a certain way that denied her a connection with her core, with herself, with her needs, the self and the needs and the emotions are down there, but if she went through things early in life that denied her a connection with that, because there's kind of a window for young children to develop that. It's 2 to 6-ish, where hopefully if things are going well enough, kids start to get to know their emotions and what they want. And, the terrible 2s, terrible 4s associated with that, where the child is starting to experiment with their own choices in life, what they want. And sometimes it just gets reduced for the child to, they just don't want what you want for them. They're saying no because they just want to experience the power of saying no, even if you know that they want it, right? Pizza is their favorite dinner and you're trying to get them to eat pizza and they're just, no, I hate pizza. And you're like, I know you love pizza, but it's more important to them at that stage to be able to assert no. It can be problematic and annoying, and sometimes therapy is necessary to help, but usually hopefully it's just a phase, and that's important. And if a child is abused in that moment, then that process can become complicated. They will refrain from asserting that power. But if things are going well enough, the kid will learn, hey, I can say no to things. And then they stop saying no arbitrarily and start actually thinking. The other part of it is during this phase, there's a lot of hopefully attunement to the child and reflection of how they feel. The parent will say, okay, are you hungry? Are you hot? Are you cold? Are you happy? Are you hurting? Are you tired? Do you want to play this game or that game? Do you want to have this meal or that meal? Do you want to play with that kid or not? Do you want to, do you want a big birthday party? Do you want a small birthday party? Do you like Iron Man or Hulk? How do you feel about these things? What do you want? And when, within reason, of course, but when kids are given enough time and space, and the parent is also modeling how they feel about things, like, I'm upset right now when I watch Sesame Street and or I don't know, Oscar the Grouch is mean to someone. That makes me upset. And then it models the kid. Also, you ask the kid, like, it looks kind of like you're upset at Oscar the Grouch, or looks like you really enjoy Grover or whatever. Does Sesame Street still exist? I assume it does. Anyway, so there's a lot of talk about that and a lot of passive exploration that the child is doing. And if they're not being abused or not being parentified or something, they're allowed to connect. It takes time. And it's a neuronal connection. It's something that you can't just teach. You have to actually experience as a person. And you emerge from that phase of life with a pretty, rudimentary but foundational understanding of how you feel and who you are and what your needs are. And Colleen seemed minor, tiny little yellow flags of some issue with that. Not a lot, but a little bit, seemingly. And so you could map that onto what we're hearing right now, I think, which is that she had narrowed it down to 4 people. You would think that the narrowing down would be narrower than that, right? Also, if it's true that you didn't really care about Brennan, you didn't really care about Cole, and you cared more about Matt and this other guy, when you get an indication from Cole and Brennan that they're not really into you, you would imagine you'd be like, well, in my core, I'm more connected. I desire this other person more than I desire that person, so I don't really matter. Whereas, if you're not in connection with who you are, and you're just hoping that someone will accept you, and you figure probably one of these people is going to meet my needs, but I don't really know because I'm not really in connection with that, then I'm really just going to try to be with whoever, even though I do connect kind of with these people, but I don't know if I'm really, because imagine some of the other people on the show, like Alexa and Brennan, for example, they seem to legit connect, right? Now, who knows? Maybe really what happened was they both also connected with a variety of other people. I don't know. But let's keep an eye out on that. Of course, I'm not diagnosing Colleen. What I'm hoping that y'all will do is think about yourself and your own lives and in your own therapy. If you're a clinician, this will be a reminder of this issue and looking for different signs. Of course, we'll never be able to know for Colleen, but it is educational to think about the signs of these things, which doesn't indicate the thing, of course.
A complete friend relationship, and I'm just very intoxicated when he said it's not working out, so that's why I cry. And then with Cole, I don't know, I think he could agree with me on this one, that we never just connected in the pods. There was a reason why we weren't speaking on the same page. And I remember he kept telling me in the pods, let's get deep, let's get deep, let's get deep. And I'm like, I don't know what that means to you. I don't have.
And that was another red or yellow flag of that when you ask someone who hasn't been given an opportunity to connect with who they are, not all the time, but a lot of the time, and you ask them to go deep or to express themselves, they run into 2 different problems, depending, and maybe both at the same time. One is that they don't even really know what you mean by that, because again, they're not connected with themselves. They're people with this issue, this lack of connection with self. They are a reflection of what other people want. They are trying to avoid rejection. We're all like that. Hopefully, we don't want to be rejected, but that's not all we are. We're checking in with other people, like, okay, what do they want? What do they want? Can I meet their needs? But also, what do I want? What do I want? How do I communicate my needs? Can they meet my needs? It's a two-way street. And if both people are doing that, then that's ideal. But for people that lack a connection with the self, they don't know what they need, really. They get some indication occasionally. It's sort of like a broken clock is correct twice a day. Every once in a while, they're like, ooh, I think I just met my need, but they don't really know how they did it or how to monitor that in the future. So they kind of zero in on things like, I'm pretty sure I want this, I'm pretty sure I want that, but they don't know how to monitor it minute to minute because they don't know how they feel. They're having feelings, they're having reactions, but they don't know, they're not in connection with them, or the emotions have to be so big that's the only time that they actually notice them. So they are mainly just one side of that relational equation where they're concerned about the other people's feelings, as we all should be, but they're not checking in with themselves. And so they're very frequently pleasers and anxious about rejection. And so when they're asked to go deeper, they don't know, they're confused as to what that means. The other thing is, for some people, when they actually are asked questions like that, sometimes creative processes will challenge people like this. People will be, like, I don't know if she's a dancer. If they said to her, dance just however you want to dance, think about how you feel and dance from your emotion instead of dance like this, dance like this, dance like this, right? For some people who don't have a connection with themselves, the self is down there, but they're not in connection with it, then to create spontaneously from themselves is hard for them to do because they don't know what they want. They're always like, well, but how do I do something that pleases you, that makes it look like it's coming from within, but I don't have anything from within. I always am dictated to from other people. And what it can do is, for the individual, is they get this implication from other people that for them, there is something down there. But when they look inside, they don't see anything. And it's scary. And it can be very, very scary, very, very concerning, very, very terrifying even. People will describe seeing emptiness, seeing a void. Now, they're not empty, they're not void, there's stuff down there, but they just can't see it yet. But it can be really scary, right? And some of you can, identify with this, and of course, talk with your therapist about it. There is a path forward to connecting with the self. It requires a lot of people close to you giving you a safe environment upon which they ask you, what do you want? How do you feel? What are your needs? What do you want? How do you feel? What are your needs? How can I help you with that? And for you to keep mulling those questions over. What do I want? How do I feel? What are my needs? What do I want? How do I feel? What are my needs? And over time, you develop that connection. Anyway, so I don't know if that's what we're seeing, but we can use it as a jumping off point along those lines. And like I said, specialists in this area that know how to help connect with the self are a really good potential remedy for this. And it's important, right? Because in order to be happy and in order to avoid sadness and anger and pain, you have to be in connection with how you feel about things. You have to know your needs, and you have to be in connection with yourself all the time. Otherwise, things will be happening. You'll be like, I don't know. And then a week later, you're like, why did I do that thing? I should have not done that thing. So it's a very important developmental skill that people don't necessarily have. You can have a successful life, you could have a family, you could have a career, you could be well liked in the community, and still not connected with who you are. And you're the one that's suffering because of that. Everyone around you might love you and appreciate you and like the things that you do for them, but you on the inside are sad and unsatisfied. When I talk with people like this, and this is, while I'm just on the topic, there's another anxiety that people will have is like, well, because they've built a life, because oftentimes people don't go to therapy for this until they're 35, 55 years old. And they come to me or other therapists and they start to discover who they are. And then these questions start to emerge of, do I want this career really? Or did I just do this career? Did I ever want kids, or did I just have kids? Do I want to be married to this person, or I don't know. I've never even really asked that question because I never knew how to answer it. And so it's terrifying, right? Because if I go down this road of self-discovery, does this mean I have to get divorced? Does this mean I have to reject all my friends? Does this mean I have to change careers? Does this mean like my parents were monsters even though I've been treating them nice? Like, there's a lot of question marks. there's no way to know the answer to that question until you actually explore it. But it's scary and it has a lot of implications. But, with a therapist that knows what they're doing, they can soothe those fears. I mean, what I tell people is like, yeah, I mean, you don't know, but we'll take it slow. And the other thing is like, say you go through a phase for a few months where you're starting to connect with yourself and you start to seriously wonder if you should be married to the person you're married to. It doesn't mean in that moment that you have to get divorced. A lot of times people will feel like, well, that's what it means. If I have a few months where I start to question my marriage, that means I have to get divorced, right? Because I'd be a terrible person if I stayed married. No, it can take a lot of time. I've seen people that go through these phases who they start, the first emergence to the self, they actually conclude they should not be married to the person they're married to. Time goes on, and they, have patience and they explore and maybe they start asserting themselves more in their relationship. 2 years later, their relationship is wonderful. And they're like, yeah, I guess I just hadn't really connected with why I wanted to be in this marriage. It's complicated. It takes time. So just helping people to not worry about taking action at the first sign that they've realized something that should be changed.
I told Alexa, I don't have any sort of trauma in my life. I'm blessed with a great childhood, a family, friends. So I felt like I was being judged that I didn't have anything traumatic happen in my lifestyle that has shaped me.
Okay, so she's talking about going deeper, and she's saying, I don't have any traumas in my life. And so, okay, I'll take her word for it on that as well, which would, what's trauma really? And so if she said, well, I do have traumas and I don't like to go deep because I don't like to talk about that, then that would be one thing. But there's still a chance that one would lack attunement early in life that would result in a lack of connection with the self that the individual wouldn't frame as quote unquote traumatic, right? But again, I want to be clear. I have no idea. I'm just using what she's presenting as a jumping off point. I would even say these hypotheses that I have about her are like 0.001% solid for me. So, who knows?
And I felt like, that might be boring to some people, but that doesn't mean that I don't deserve love. And I felt in that moment that he was judging me just for not going deep, whatever that meant.
I do find that a little odd, personally. Just aside from everything I've said earlier, if someone's like, hey, let's go deep, and you're like, well, what? I don't have any traumas. I don't have any traumas. You're like, well, it's one, and maybe Cole said something along those lines. But I don't think that's what he was getting at, seemingly from the edit anyway. Just because you don't have any traumas doesn't mean you can't, quote unquote, go deep. You can't talk about your needs. You can't talk about your aspirations and your disappointments, your regrets, things that you long for, things that you really need and want, and things that really move you. Traumas don't cause that, right? Humanness causes that. Connection with the self presents that. All right, well, that is it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.